Well, welcome tonight to the beautiful Bill Baggs Cape Florida State Park and another event by the Friends of Cape Florida. We really appreciate you all being here. We really appreciate you becoming members and supporting the park and the Friends of Cape Florida. So Rumya is, of course, a Key Biscayne celebrity. She's been here for many, many years. I don't even know. Maybe we.
9 years at the foundation now.
Okay.
This year.
She is involved in lots and lots of projects with the foundation, of course. Rumya is also here quite often, very, 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 very early as part of our sea turtle research patrol during turtle season from March through October. And she's involved in a lot of citizen science events and projects. So she's a real amazing resource for our community and for our educational groups on Key Biscayne that really benefit from her knowledge and for her wonderful way of presenting her passion project.
Thank you, Christina.
All right, so without further ado, Rumya and Turtle Trails.
Thank you. As Christina so very nicely told everybody, my name is Rumya. I am the Director of Environmental Science at the Key Biscayne Community Foundation, and I'm also their Operations Manager. I have my fingers in a lot of pies, so I'm also the Senior Grant Administrator at the Coral Futures Lab, at the Rosenstiel School at University of Miami. And as Christina said, I do volunteer work here at the park as a turtle nest evaluator. I actually have to be here tomorrow at like 6:30 in the morning. And I'm here Thursdays and Saturdays. On Saturdays with Heather, who is joining us today. I also do 5 mangrove cleanups every year. And for you guys who came today, I brought the bags that I give to all of our mangrove cleanup participants. And there is a citizen science notebook in here. This bag is obviously reusable. It is made from recycled plastic, and our notebooks are also made from recycled paper. So there should be enough for all of you guys here. So make sure and grab one of those before you go. And then we also do monthly lectures at the community center. And so this is actually a similar one that I gave a few years ago. We bring in guest speakers all the time. Sometimes if we don't have a guest speaker, I'll be the speaker. And I will be the speaker actually on May 29th. And we'll be talking about the plastic-free KB program that we run through the Citizen Science program. And that is basically we are trying to get residents and businesses to stop using single-use plastic on the island. Now that we got all that out of the way, today we're going to talk about turtles, sea turtles in particular. This is just kind of an outline of what we're going to do for the presentation today. We're going to start with some sea turtle facts. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not know. Hopefully you'll find some of them really interesting. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time talking about obstacles that sea turtles face because I think that's a really, really important thing to focus on and to understand what's going on kind of in our environment. And then what's being done and how we can help. So to start, sea turtle facts. Sea turtles appeared in the fossil record between 110 and 65 million years ago. There have been a few different iterations of sea turtles, but they have been largely unchanged. And that is, despite changes in sizes, their general physiology, their general physique, the way that they're shaped, generally the same, because that has worked very, very well for them for 100 million years. You will find them in every ocean in the world except around the polar regions, and that is because they need warmer water. They can stand some amount of cold, but not too much. And that is one of the things that is happening to them is when we have these extreme weather events where you have sudden cold come in and they can't move out of that water fast enough, they get cold shocked. So while they can travel across the entire world, they cannot go where the water is too cold. There are 7 different species of sea turtles around the world. You guys have probably heard of the 3 that nest here regularly, which are green turtles. Occasionally we have leatherbacks and a lot of loggerheads. We also very, very rarely will get hawksbill turtles nesting here. Like last year, I believe we had 24 nests in all of Florida, so very few of those, but they do come occasionally. And Kemp's ridleys, which is one of the most endangered species of sea turtles in the world. Olive ridley turtles nest in the Atlantic Ocean, but not in Florida. And flatback turtles, which you may not have heard of, nest only in Australia. There is also a subspecies called black sea turtles. They're believed to be a subspecies of green turtles, and they only nest on the Pacific side of Central America. As I mentioned, there are 7 species. All of them are endangered, and 3 of them are critically endangered. So that's the olive ridley, Kemp's ridley, and the hawksbill are all critically endangered, but all of the other species are also considered endangered. So some interesting facts you may know. Turtles can live up to 100 years, and this is true of almost all of the species. It varies from one to another. Sometimes it's between 50 and 80 years. Sometimes it might be 80 to 120 years. We don't actually know for sure. This is just a kind of guesstimate. But generally speaking, almost every species of sea turtle can probably live to at least 100 years, sometimes longer than that. Leatherback turtles are the largest living sea turtles, and they say that they can get the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. That is true to some extent. They don't get as tall, but they can get as long as a Volkswagen Beetle. Loggerheads are named because they have gigantic heads, and we'll talk about why in a little while. But the interesting thing, and this is true of all sea turtles, you can see it very well on a loggerhead skull. So these are this is a loggerhead skull, front and back. And this little thumb-sized hole right there. So here we have a loggerhead skull. This little hole that I can stick my thumb in, it's literally the size of my thumb. If I push it in any further, I'm going to get stuck. That's where their brain goes. So sea turtles rely very, very heavily on instinct. They're not like dogs. You're not going to be able to teach them tricks. You can't really raise them very well in captivity. I mean, they'll be fine for the most part. I mean, obviously we have a lot of them that stay at sea turtle hospitals and zoos and things like that. But they're not trainable. They're not like intelligent. They're very, very heavily instinct because they have very small brains, and that is what their brain knows how to do. Hawksbills alone, of all 7 species, cannot be eaten. All of them in their history have been hunted for food at one time or another, except for hawksbills because their flesh is toxic. And that is because of the specific type of food that they eat. And I'll talk about that later. And sometimes sea turtles do need to sleep. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of the size of the different types of turtles. The leatherback is the biggest. That's about 6 feet. And when I say 6 feet, I'm talking about the shell length. We're not talking about including the head and the tail and everything. A loggerhead is about 3.5 feet. That's pretty normal for a loggerhead. Greens are a little bigger at about 4.5 feet. And you can see these other ones, they're all pretty small comparatively. This outline down here in blue, that is an extinct species of turtle called Archelon that died out, I think, around 2 or 3 million years ago. It could get, the shell alone, mind you, 13 feet long and weighed 2.5 to 3.5 tons. And it was perfectly happy living in our oceans. It was doing fine. It went extinct like other things go extinct for whatever reason. But that's just to show you that, like, while the size may have changed, their overall body structure has not really changed. That's a picture of an Archelon skeleton that was found almost completely intact, just the shell. That one is about 9 feet or so. This is that same leatherback turtle that I showed earlier. Now, they are playing with the camera a little bit. Obviously, this turtle's in the foreground, so it looks bigger. But it is actually quite huge, and this one's probably at least 5 feet long, I should say. Did you have a question?
And then park where there's water and a fence. You look in there, and there's a bunch of turtles, but they have a very, very long neck.
Those are likely green turtles. So we have a lot of green turtles that just hang out, but they don't actually nest on Key Biscayne. But they tend to have a longer neck than the loggerheads, which are just like the big head and short neck.
And they're kind of small, right?
Well, they're young ones if they're small, because none of these are under like maybe 2 feet is the smallest one.
About the ones in the park.
Yeah.
Yeah, where the old zoo. But
Oh, you're talking about in freshwater, in a pond? Oh yeah, so those are just regular freshwater turtles. There's a few different species of those, but these guys are all saltwater. They're only in the ocean. And this is one video, very quick, of a turtle sleeping. Most of them will sleep this way. You will see them sleeping underwater.
So he just finds a place.
He just finds a cozy place and will just tuck himself in. Big yawn. So
How long does he sleep for?
depends on the species, but they can actually stay underwater for a few hours when they're asleep. Freshwater turtles, I don't actually know if saltwater turtles can do this, but freshwater turtles can breathe through their rear end. So they can stay underwater for a very long time. I have a pet turtle. He is a 3-striped mud turtle. He's about this big. He is like 95% aquatic. He never wants to come out of the water. And he sleeps overnight underwater. He buries himself and won't come out the entire night. I imagine sea turtles can probably stay, some of them can stay under for quite some time. Now, one thing that I have always learned my whole life about sea turtles is that once they leave and go to the water, go to the ocean, they don't ever come back except for the females when they're nesting. And if you Google that, do sea turtles come to shore, all you will find is they are on shore when the females are nesting or when the hatchlings come out and they make their way to the ocean. However, in February, I was in Hawaii and I heard about a beach where sea turtles came ashore to sleep. And I was like, that's not a thing. They don't do that. I don't believe you. But I went, and sure enough, there are sea turtles in the hundreds would come ashore and literally just plop down and sleep. These are all green sea turtles. I was on Maui. But I don't remember the name of the beach, but I can find it. That's my video. That's why it's all shaky and bad. But yeah, so they actually had a longer one, but it was a little too long for the presentation. But yeah, they just come ashore. You can just see there's so many. Like there are some rocks, but you can just see there's so many sea turtles. And as I was standing there with my family, more and more of them were coming ashore. And they just get far enough from the water and they just plop down and fall asleep.
They can stay underwater for hours on end?
Yes, for quite some time. It does vary from one species to another. I couldn't tell you the exact numbers, but they can stay underwater for quite some time. And while I was snorkeling in Maui, we did see turtles literally just kind of tucked underneath a coral and just sleeping. So they would do that too, but then they do this. And this is probably something that evolved for a very specific group or like family lineage of turtles, because they learned that on these islands there are no large predators. So it's very safe for them to come ashore. Nothing is there. This is obviously before people were around, but nothing was there to actually hurt them. So they were safe to come ashore and nothing would happen to them. And so they still do it. And they had that area kind of roped off and people were very respectful of that line. Nobody would cross that line, even though you could just step over it. It was like a foot tall. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but this is just to give you an idea of what these turtles eat. And it varies from one species to another. Green turtles, mostly plants, and they don't say 100% within their, like, whatever they are known to eat, but generally speaking, this is what they eat. So green turtles, mostly plants. Leatherbacks are gelatinivores, which means they eat gelatinous things like jellyfish or other invertebrates that are like squishy. Loggerheads are carnivores, and this is where their giant head comes into play because they will crush a whelk shell to eat the snail inside. They have very, very, very strong jaws that they can use to crush like big crabs and whelks and like large snails and things like that. Hawksbills are spongivores. There are a lot of sponges are toxic, and that is why their flesh is toxic. They eat sponges and tunicates and things like that, but a lot of these things are very toxic. So they're safe in that way. Nothing's going to eat them. They have other problems. Olive ridleys and flatbacks are omnivores. They kind of eat anything, whatever they can catch. And the Kemp's ridley is also a carnivore. Eats a very similar diet to the loggerhead, but on a smaller scale because they're much, much smaller turtles. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of what's been happening with their populations as far as we can tell. So this is based on nesting and the numbers that we've been collecting for nests. And this is just two of them. We're looking at green sea turtles and loggerheads. And this one goes up to 2015 and that one goes up to 2018. I could not find a more recent one. But as you can see, this is 1989 and 1996. The numbers were terrible. I mean, it was like 0 in 1989. And the 80s were really the lowest point for turtle nesting in the States when we started monitoring. And that was because of a lot of different reasons, construction, coastal development, poaching, all kinds of stuff. Because up until the 1970s or 80s, they didn't have any protection. And so people would poach them all the time. So once protection was put in place, you can see there has been a steady increase in nests and then a huge jump in the mid-2000s, which is nice. So around 2013, right here is where there's a big jump. And as I mentioned, this only goes up to like 2018. 2023 was a record year for all turtles in Florida. And I put those numbers down here. So this right here, 2015, it goes up to about 28,000 nests. In 2023, green turtles had 76,000 nests. And then in loggerheads are up here around 50,000 in 2017. And then in 2023, we had 133,000 nests. So huge jump that one year. It was a miserable year for everybody doing turtle nest evaluations. Yeah, that's why Chris quit, actually. But it was a great year for turtles, and we were really excited about that. But one thing you'll notice is this kind of up and down pattern. And so that's very normal for them. They have a boom and bust cycle. And so that was a huge year, and then the next year has been low. And we get predominantly loggerheads on Key Biscayne. So loggerheads have a funny cycle where they tend to have 2 low years and 1 high year, although you're not really seeing that here. It's kind of, their cycle's gotten screwed up. But right now, last year and this year so far have been, last year was about average. This year has started out slow, but you never know what's going to happen. We'll see. Hawksbills, as I mentioned, were the most endangered species in the world. I think it was 1989, they had 700 nests globally that we know of that were counted. So that includes any nests in Florida, but also just anywhere. They mostly nest throughout the Caribbean. There is video of them from 1947. They used to come ashore and nest in huge numbers all at once. It's called an aribada. And Olive Ridley's do this and Kemp's do this, where literally thousands of them night after night for like a week just come ashore. And you just have videos of literally, it's just littered with turtles. And they're all coming ashore and nesting at the same time. And it's just this weird kind of evolutionary thing that they've done to increase their numbers game, basically. And based on that video, and there was a scientific study that like picked this video apart, extrapolated numbers. They estimate that in 1947, there was roughly 120,000 hawksbill nests. And that went down to 700 in 1989. And now, the last number I read was like the like the teens, the 20 teens, it was up to about 12, 15,000. So it's doing better, but not anywhere. It's 10% of what it was in the 40s. So why does that happen? Well, people like to eat turtles. There's all kinds of different foods and turtle soup and stuff. Even here in Florida, the natives here in Florida would eat turtles, although they did it more sustainably. But when settlers came, they also would kill and eat turtles. And apparently turtle soup was very popular in this area, I read. But then also in a lot of other countries, things like making jewelry out of their shells and things like that. So there's a lot of other like things that they use the turtles for, but food, when killing a turtle is the main reason. Poaching the eggs is also a huge, huge problem. They are considered a delicacy in a lot of places, especially in the States, and a lot of Asian countries consider them a delicacy. Some places also consider them an aphrodisiac. So there is a very, very big black market for eggs. Obviously, that's a huge problem. If you never let these eggs develop, then you're just, destroying the population before it starts. And in this case, you can see, I mean, that's probably like a whole beach's worth of eggs right there. Obviously, they're very, very protected here in the States. There are very big penalties, $100 per egg if you're caught with eggs. You can be fined up to $100,000 if you're caught poaching a nest. And I think it's like 10 years in prison, but don't quote me on that. But it is one of the more severe punishments when it comes to messing with animals. I think dogfighting has less of a severe punishment than that, but it is pretty bad. We did have a nest poached on Key Biscayne 2 years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And that same year, there was one poached in Miami Beach. And I think they caught the guy at Miami Beach, but they couldn't prove if he was the one that did it here or not. So it still happens, even here. People still try it. What?
They took eggs?
They took the entire nest, yeah. The way that they can do that, all of our nests, as we find them, are numbered. And so if they go across the whole beach and they see how many, like, oh, okay, they numbered up to 10, and then they come out the next night and they see now there's a number 11, that's the freshest nest. So they'll dig that nest up. And you can always tell the difference between like an animal digging it up and a person digging it up because they move all the things out of the way, like all the protections you put in place. They're carefully set to the side, and like, a raccoon's not going to take your stakes and pile them up neatly to one side, So fishing debris, obviously another big problem. And that includes the getting tangled in lines, but then also swallowing fish hooks and things like that. This guy, you can tell he's sick because he's covered in barnacles. He looks really sad. He apparently had swallowed a fairly large fishing hook, and it was affecting the way he was eating. So I think that one made a recovery, if I'm not mistaken. This one also, he's got a big fishing hook right here, but you can always tell when they get sick because they get barnacles growing on them too much. So that's what's going on here. That's what all this is. And he's got that on his face and on his head, because the sicker they get, the slower they move, and it's easier for the barnacles to settle on them. Boat strikes, obviously that's a huge problem. This one you can see where the propellers made marks in its back. This one's very misshapen, and it's because it was hit by a boat. It was brought to the turtle hospital, which is where I took this picture. There's a turtle hospital in Marathon. It healed really weird because of what happened to its shell. It was very misshapen. And now this guy has air trapped in his shell, which they cannot get rid of. It is impossible to get rid of that. They have a lot of turtles with this problem, and it is caused, generally speaking, by boat strikes. And because of the amount of air in his shell, he cannot dive. He's too buoyant. And so he'll never be released. He's fed there because if he's not able to dive, he can't hunt for food. And they have probably 20 or 30 turtles that live there permanently now for that reason. Chemicals, I won't spend too much time on this, but chemical runoff that gets into the water is a huge part of the reason that we get really bad red tide blooms. Red tide is a natural phenomenon. It does happen on its own, but because of chemical interference that we are adding into the water, it is basically we're adding fertilizer, and it creates a bigger problem where the red tide just gets out of control, and that then affects the turtles and how they are able to even survive. Red tide, one of the things they say about red tide is that it's a good toxin in that you know immediately when you're exposed. You feel it on your skin, you feel it in your throat, it burns and it hurts. So you know, like, oh God, I have to get out of here. There's something, the ocean spray is like bothering me. There's something in it. So you know to get out of there. They're in the water. They swim into it and they don't know which way to turn to get back out of it. So, and then it affects them really badly. It gives them like neurological problems and all kinds of other things. And then we have all these stories about how red tide is like exploding and the manatees are being affected and the turtles are being affected, and it's all terrible. Plastic pollution, of course. I mentioned that leatherbacks eat predominantly gelatinous food. They eat jellyfish. If you're a turtle, that looks like a jellyfish. This right here, that is a jellyfish, and that is not a jellyfish. They don't look any different to me, let alone I can't imagine how a turtle would see that as any different. This is a man of war that washed ashore. It looks like a plastic bag or a balloon that's inflated. And what ends up happening is they eat so much of this plastic debris that they think is food. It doesn't digest, it sits in their stomach, they feel full, they have no nutritional value from that, they stop eating because they're full, and then they starve to death. This also happens with little turtles that eat these little tiny brightly colored pieces of plastic. The same thing happens. They think that that's food, it fills them up, they end up starving to death. And that of course doesn't include the fact that plastic leaches a lot of chemicals into the water. Some chemicals behave like hormones, like endocrine disruptors. They can cause problems with reproduction, with development, with behavior, stuff like that. Obviously, like they can get tangled in a plastic bag, not just like eating it. And then there's like physical barriers. I was working on the beach once and we had just dug up a nest and we found a few live hatchlings in it. And I'll explain to you why that can happen sometimes. When we find them, if they're strong enough, we let them go and we watch them to make sure that they make it to the water. As I'm watching this one guy, and as he's running, he's like going full speed. As he's running, he just suddenly stops and just starts flapping around in one spot. And I was like, what is going on? And I go and look, and what happened was there was a fishing line in the sand that was buried, but there was one loop just sticking out, and he ran right into it, and he got stuck. And like, I couldn't see that. I would not have seen it if he didn't get caught in it. So you can imagine things like that become a huge problem. And then of course, coastal development is a huge issue for them. This picture was taken on Key Biscayne. That is a nesting mother. And these types of bright lights are very, very confusing for turtles. The adults don't get quite as confused, although they can. They get disoriented, but it's the babies that get really confused. They have spent 100 million years learning to follow the stars and the moon and the reflections on the water, so they know how to get to the water. And now we have lights in every direction that they look, and it confuses them. They don't know the difference between these lights in this building and starlight on the water. And so you end up with baby hatchlings everywhere. So that's why there's all these ordinances for lights on the beach, some of them stricter than others. But that's the reason, because it really, really messes with the turtles and their nesting. But then you also have things like dredging and seawalls and things like that. Here you can see a turtle. These are turtle tracks. This is a mother that came up to nest, and she couldn't find a spot, and she just walked along the seawall trying to find a place to make a nest. This one came up, hit the wall, got confused, got annoyed, whatever, and then turned around and left. And so, you know, a lot of like these types of obstructions can also cause problems for them as they're trying to find a place to nest, because this did not exist for 100 million years. It has existed now for maybe 1,000 years. It's a very new problem for them.
The Key Biscayne beach restoration project, does that affect the turtles negatively?
They try to be very careful about that. There is some speculation about when they do like restoration with sand, where they're bringing in sand, that might deter turtles, because they learn the feel of the sand, and if it feels differently, they may not like it. There's a little debate about that, but generally speaking, they do try to avoid doing restoration efforts during turtle season. So it gives everything kind of time for it to like kind of settle before the turtles start coming in. It's hard to know without long-term data to you know whether or not it's affecting them, but it's entirely possible that it does. It also may not. Like in stuff like this, it's much more obvious. Like clearly, like that turtle is like having a problem. But you know, when they're doing restoration, it might be good for them, because obviously when you're trying to restore what like the natural area looked like, that is good for the environment in general. But whether or not, you know, bringing in sand from other places with a different texture that might, you know, it might incubate the eggs differently than the sand that's normally here. It feels differently to the turtles. That might be an issue, but I couldn't say for sure. And this is one of the reasons that when we release the baby turtles that we have, we release them on the beach and let them run to the water. We do not release them directly in the water. And that is because they orient themselves to the beach using the magnetic field. And that's how they find their way back. So they're not going to nest in the exact same spot where they were born, but they will be in the same stretch of beach, generally speaking. And that's actually how they've been trying to, or they have in the past, they don't really do this now, but they've tried to get like green sea turtles to come nest on Key Biscayne in the past by releasing green sea turtle hatchlings on Key Biscayne Beach. In theory, once they grow up, they'll come back. The problem with that is that, sadly, 1 in 1,000 hatchlings will make it to adulthood. So they may have, you know, released 500 hatchlings and none of them made it to adulthood, so nobody really knows what happened. And then, of course, you have natural things, disease and predation. This tumor disease, fibropapilloma, this may actually be linked to human pollution. They think that it's actually linked to sewage and similar human papillomavirus that may have mutated. They're still studying that, but it is a possibility. It has become a bigger and bigger issue. It does mostly affect green sea turtles, but it can occasionally be found in other ones. And then, of course, predation. And this is one of the things that we protect against, or we try to, with our nesting program that we have. Raccoons absolutely love sea turtle eggs. And the raccoon population in Bill Baggs is at least 4 or 5 times higher than it should be. And that's because of people. The park can probably sustain a healthy population of roughly 50 raccoons. And there's easily 200 or 300 raccoons here. And it's because they get trash and they get more water sources. They go into the bathrooms and drink water out of the toilets and everything. So there's more freshwater sources for them and more sources of food. And so their population is much higher than it should be. But then also, like a lot of other things, will dig up sea turtle eggs if they can find them.
Be done to control the raccoon population here?
I mean, every now and then they'll do trapping. They trapped last year, and I think they caught like 80 in like a week. But you know, they can only do that so often. It's expensive and it's difficult. But they do try that. And then, you know, they keep the trash cans covered. We do our best to educate everybody about like being careful about leaving food out and stuff like that. But there's only so much you can do, because Key Biscayne is also right there, the village. So there's going to be a lot living there too. Okay, so I want to warn you that this has a happy ending, but I just wanted to show this to you because I mentioned that turtles live predominantly on instinct. This turtle you'll see every time the shark comes after him, he turns his back towards him, because if he's swimming like this, the shark can just bite down on him very easily. So he turns his back this way, and the shark can't grab a hold of his back. Sharks are the main predator for adult sea turtles. You get some scratches on his back, but he's okay. And the ending is really great. The other thing about something like this is that a sea turtle can move and turn much more quickly than a large shark can. So as long as he's really quick about it, he can go circles around the shark. Can you see? Sorry, I'm trying not to block. I think he'll be okay. He looks pretty healthy. Yeah, no, and that's what the shark is counting on, is for the turtle to get tired. But then here, he bit him. He bit him and he's like, oh, forget this, I'm done. He bit me. So obviously, you know, predation is going to be an issue. And that is mostly, I mean, not to say obviously they do attack large adult turtles, but it's a huge, huge issue for sea turtle hatchlings. Literally everything that can fit a sea turtle hatchling in its mouth will eat a sea turtle hatchling. Everything. Literally everything. Like I can't stress that enough. Everything eats them. So that's why 1 in 1,000 will make it to adulthood. Obviously, climate change is a big problem for everything. With turtles, it comes down to temperature. That's the biggest problem for them. So climate change causes extreme weather events, and sometimes you get these like very sudden cold snaps that shouldn't happen. As I mentioned, turtles need warmer water. That's why you don't find them near the poles. And so when you have a cold snap and the water temperature drops very suddenly, they can get cold shocked, and that they become very lethargic. And if they can't get out of that cold water, they will die from hypothermia. The other problem is the temperature of the sand where their eggs are. Like alligators, the temperature of the sand actually determines the sex of the babies. Sand is very warm. They will produce females. If the sand is a little bit cooler, they produce males. And the problem that they're finding is that they are making females hand over fist. All these females and very, very few males, because the sand is just getting warmer and warmer, and it's a big problem. So what's being done? There are a few programs that include like satellite tagging to monitor them, see how they travel, where they travel. These tags are temporary because as a sea turtle grows, they shed the scutes, which are the plates on their back. So this will only last until he sheds his scutes, and then it comes off. So a few weeks to a few months, that will be there. But in that time, they can track its movement, you know, all over the world. They also test their blood to see, and that gives them a lot of information about where these turtles have been, what they're eating, what they're doing. And that is also really helpful information. So being able to track them in this way helps us know, one, where they're going, what they're doing, what they're eating, and where might be a good place to create a marine protected area. Do we have a lot of turtles hanging out and feeding in this area? Maybe we should protect that area. And then of course, our program, which is all over Florida and throughout the United States actually, which is sea turtle nest monitoring. We do it throughout the United States. It helps track the species that are nesting in the United States. It helps us get our numbers, so it gives us a good idea of what's happening with their populations. Oh, I can start that video. It teaches us about their life cycle. That's how we learned about that boom and bust cycle that they have. They come in for like very few nests one year, and then a whole bunch of nests the next year, and then very few nests again. So that way, you know, if we didn't understand that cycle, then it might be very concerning when you have, you know, 7,000 nests one year and then like 1,000 the next year, and you're like, oh my God, what happened? Did all the turtles die? But understanding that kind of life cycle is very helpful. Yes?
The seaweed that we're having, is that going to affect the hatchling?
Generally speaking, no. And I'll show you a little video right after this that kind of shows that they can make their way through it. Go ahead.
Can you ID to species based on egg, or do you have to wait?
No, we ID the species based on flipper marks in the sand.
What is the cause for the boom and bust cycle?
That's a good question. I don't know. It just seems to be the way they just kind of operate. But yeah, that's actually a very good question, and I have no idea why they do that. Now I have to look that up. I'm going to look that up. because I don't like saying I don't know. I'm a scientist, we're full of ourselves. We like to answer everything. So I actually have 3 slides in here that I took out for the sake of time, but they show the different flipper marks and how different species make different marks. It's why we go out first thing in the morning before anything else has walked on the beach. So we look for the specific tracks coming in, and then there are very specific signs of a nest that they make. And it changes from one species to another, but you learn to find the specific marks that they leave for a nest. And then we figure out where the nest is and we mark it, and then we erase the tracks.
Fairly unusual for a scientist to say, I don't know. So I want you to give a big round of applause to them. You don't have to. Courageous enough and honest enough to do that. The second thing I wanted to say, if more scientists would say, I don't know, I think the audiences would be much support research like that, right? I mean, I think it's fairly easy to follow why things like this, why research like that, why projects like that are really important for us to understand why things happen, what causes them, what can we do on our own island. So we have a program called Adopt a Nest. It's $149 for the season. You can adopt a nest. You get your sign with a photo, words that you want to designate to this turtle nest that will be staked onto the nests that we have had within the state park boundaries. And that program directly supports the sea turtle survey program. I would encourage you to go to our website and maybe become an adoptee of one of our nests that will hopefully hatch here.
I will say this, there is actually a lot of things about turtles that we don't know. I'm basically telling you everything I do know. That was an excellent question. I actually have no idea. But turtles very much are a mystery to us. You know, we know about their nesting grounds. We know a lot about their nests. We estimate their populations based on the nesting data that we have, but we don't actually have a way to count their actual populations out in the wild. So it's all, you know, based on numbers, and we're estimating, and we don't necessarily know their entire life cycle out in the ocean. So there's a lot of things about them that are very much a mystery. So this is a really bad video because it's very grainy, but I wanted to show this to you because I think it's adorable. So as I mentioned, there are very specific signs to the nests, and they vary by species. When it comes to a loggerhead, which is what you find here on the beach, they come up and they make a very, like, usually, not always, sometimes they do weird things and it's very difficult to figure out. But generally speaking, they make a very specific mound, and then there's an area where they've kind of like body pitted a little bit and they've moved the sand in a certain way, and then they've because they've come in, made their nest, done this like mound and whatever, and then they turn and leave. Ideally, that's what you want. Sometimes they do all kinds of weird things and they're all over the place. You don't know what they're doing. This is a Kemp's Ridley nesting. She's finished her nest, she's burying it, and this is what she does to camouflage it. She does a little dance, and what she's doing is throwing sand to try to camouflage her nest. And I love it. I think it's the funniest thing. So this was somewhere in Florida, I don't remember where, but one of the few nests that we get for Kemp's Ridleys. But they just sit there and I'm gonna hide my nest. And then, of course, this is more or less what one of our marked nests looks like. You can see that there is, usually we cover this, but there's a screen over the top, and that is to keep predators out. And then obviously the stakes are there to keep people and everybody else out of it. The screen is big enough to let the baby turtles out. So it's not holding them in. It doesn't usually affect them, but it does help to keep raccoons and other things out. And the raccoons, if they'll find the nest regardless of whether the screen is there, obviously they don't care. And you'd be surprised how far they can stick their little arms down through one of those holes trying to get to the nest. They can go down really, really far sometimes, but you just hope that the nest is far enough down. It's usually like 12 to 18 inches down. So it's, you know, it should be safe with the screen on top, but you never know, things happen. And then that's just the baby hatchling tracks look like when they leave. Usually when they hatch all at once, and it won't just be one little hatchling by themselves. There'll be hundreds of them, all kind of, the whole area will be covered in little tracks like that. After a nest has hatched, we mark it. We see all the hatchling tracks. We're like, okay, it hatched last night, And so we mark it as hatched. And then 3 days later, we still check it every single day because sometimes you have stragglers that'll come out the next night or 2 nights later. We still check it every single day. And then after 3 days have passed, we dig up the nest. And it's at this point we're basically just doing a count. We check the number of eggshells. Sometimes you get eggs that have not hatched, they just never developed for one reason or another. And we count how many whole eggs, how many damaged eggs, how many hatched eggs. And the damage can come from ghost crabs. They just make these little snips in the eggs because the eggs are they're like kind of leathery. They're not hard eggs like a chicken egg. They're malleable a little bit. And so they'll make these little snips and they'll eat some of the egg and then that egg is dead, basically. It's not going to develop. You have some like grubs and things that live in the sand sometimes that will get into them. There's all kinds of things that can happen. Sometimes the roots from plants will grow into them and cause problems. But so we record all of this information. We count the number of eggs and we get an idea of the hatch rate. And that again helps us ultimately determine around like what the population is, how the population is
How
doing.
long will it take for the eggs to hatch once they're laid?
8 to 9 weeks. It varies depending on temperature also. The warmer it is, the faster it'll hatch. And the cooler it is, the longer it'll take, and they'll likely be male. So I put this in there specifically because of the sargassum. So they do surprisingly well with sargassum. They will climb their little hearts out. He's got another mountain to climb right after that too. But they do pretty well with it.
Do most of them hatch at
This
night
is the same
or
one.
during the day?
At night. They are generally always hatch at night, but you have occasional ones that will get confused for some reason. They hatch during the day.
I guess that's when you could get a better video.
Yeah. So the video I showed earlier happened one morning while I was patrolling with Liz, the park biologist, and she thinks actually the vibration of our vehicle might have kind of woken them up, so they started hatching while we were looking at them. Generally speaking, they come out during the night. 1, because it's safer. There are fewer predators at night. But 2, that's how they see the starlight and the moonlight on the water. During the day, they can't really see like what direction the water is, so they won't know.
Any particular time, like in the
No
wee
idea.
hours? No.
After dark.
After
We
dark.
have no idea. It could be like, right after it gets dark, or it could be 4 o'clock in the morning. There's no way to know for sure. Same with the mothers when they come in. They come in during night because, again, it's safer. There's fewer predators out, and they can see by starlight. But we don't know when they're going to come in. It could be early in the night. It could be like just before sunrise. It could be any time during the night. So, finally, how can we help? First of all, very importantly, if you were to see a sea turtle that is being harassed by somebody, that is in distress or injured, or that is dead even, this number you want to call the FWC. And I can bring this back up before we go if you guys want to keep that number. But they will come and deal with that situation, especially with dead sea turtles. They'll come and collect it because they want to do a necropsy to see how it died, what happened to it. Was it a boat strike or did it get attacked by a shark? That matters, and we want to know that. We want to keep track of that. So you can either do it like you can go online and let them know, or you can call the number. If you're in the Keys, you can call the turtle hospital. They have a turtle ambulance, and they will come and pick up the turtle and take it back to the hospital. Also, if you're in the Keys, you should just visit the turtle hospital. They do tours, and it's amazing. So yeah, that's their little ambulance. I went there a few years ago, and it was totally worth it. It was amazing. They do amazing work there. And then obviously there's like always things that everybody can do. If you're boating, just keep a very close eye out for turtles. You don't want to hit them with your propellers or with the front of your boat even. Stay informed about seafood. There's a lot of seafood that is not turtle safe. So the way that they catch the seafood will also catch turtles. And depending on how they do that, it might keep them underwater in a way that they end up suffocating. Now, I know that I said sea turtles can stay underwater for a long time when they're asleep, but they're regulating their oxygen differently when they're asleep versus when they're awake. And especially if they're stressed, they're using up oxygen quickly, so they need air. And so if they're trapped in something, they can suffocate. It's different if they're relaxed and taking a snooze somewhere. Obviously, avoid single-use plastic. That's a no-brainer. That one's easy. Don't use plastic bags. Don't use things that you know can cause a problem if it is to accidentally blow away from you in the wind. Try not to use too much lawn fertilizer. As I mentioned, that is one of the things that There's a lot of different causes, but it is one of the things that can cause a red tide bloom if you have a yard. Shielding lights that are on the beachfront, keeping the beach clear of obstacles. So not just trash, but also lawn or beach chairs and things that people just sometimes leave kind of all over the beach. Those can cause a problem if a sea turtle nest hatches. Those babies now have to try to figure out how to get around that thing. And for you, it's just a beach chair. For them, it's like, you know, the Great Wall of China that they're trying to get around because they're this big. They're really small. Participate in cleanups. We have beach cleanups all the time on Key Biscayne. As I mentioned, I do 5 mangrove cleanups a year, and so you get to go out on a paddleboard and go into the mangroves, which personally, even though you're picking up trash, it's absolutely beautiful. So it's worth it just for that. Don't buy any products made from turtles. I think that one's also a no-brainer. That's easy enough. Fishing practices. Make sure that you clean up your fishing line. You know, be responsible about it. Don't just leave it out there. Try to be careful about that. And of course, civic engagement. Talk to your legislators and tell them that, like, I don't think you're doing enough to like protect the sea turtles, or any animal, anything that you care about. If you don't think that they're doing enough, then let them know.
What about filling in holes?
Oh, that's a good one. I forgot about that one. Filling in holes on the beach. I know it is very, very instinctual for people to dig a hole the moment they get to the beach, especially boys. They love it. And that's totally fine. Dig all the holes you want on the beach, but before you leave, fill them in again. Because what happens is, again, these baby sea turtles hatch, they're running to the water, and then they fall in a hole and they're stuck until like either something eats them or we find them, or they bake in the sun. They're small. They can climb to an extent. The sargassem's easier because there's stuff they can grab onto, but the sand, if they're trying to climb out of a hole, is just going to keep falling. So depending on how deep the hole is, they can't get out. And so that is actually something when we're on the beach patrolling in the morning looking for sea turtle nests, we fill in these holes that we find. So one, it's a lot of work for us and it's annoying. And two, you don't want to hurt the baby sea turtle. So definitely make sure and tell everybody else, fill in your holes when you dig holes on the beach. Yes?
Once hatchlings hit the water, do we know what like their mission is or where they go?
Most of them, as far as we know, they go to the Sargasso Sea, which is off the coast of the east coast of the United States. And it is called the Sargasso Sea because it is full of sargassum. Or it might be vice versa. Sargassum is called sargassum because of the Sargasso Sea. I'm not sure. Either way, it's full of sargassum. It's kind of a gyre. And so they just kind of like exists in that area. And what they do is they just climb around in the sargassum for a few years, actually, eating all the little bugs and stuff like that within the sargassum. And then growing until they are to a size where they feel whatever, you know, big enough or strong enough that they can venture out into the ocean. So at least that's for loggerheads. Green sea turtles are vegetarian. I don't know if they eat sargassum, so I'm not sure if they do the same thing. But we do know that tons and tons and tons of baby sea turtles go straight out to the Sargasso Sea and try to grow up there. Yes?
I was interested in how they breathe. So you said some breathe from the tail, and others, where they breathe?
No, all of them breathe through their nostrils. That is the main
In the
way.
water, sorry.
In the water, all of them breathe through their nostrils. I was saying freshwater turtles, I know, can breathe from the rear end. I don't know if saltwater sea turtles can do that. But they do regulate their breathing differently when they're sleeping, so they can stay under for a long time. I don't know if they can also breathe from their rear end. It's possible, but I'm just not sure.
So I'm assuming they have lungs?
Yes, they have lungs, absolutely. Go ahead.
Why do they reproduce on the surface, like in the floating nose? Is that always a thing?
The
What-
mating.
Mating?
Mating.
Yeah, it's convenience, I guess. I'm not really sure. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I imagine it would be easier if when they're mating, staying at the surface because, again, mating is going to be a high energy, theoretically, hopefully for them, a high energy exercise. So they'll need more oxygen for that. And so they have to stay near the surface in order to be able to breathe. Oxygen in the water is significantly less than oxygen in the air. And the way, like, if you take in a lungful of air, that space, the air that you pulled in is immediately replaced by more air around you, right? Like, there's no, like, shortage. You didn't create a vacuum in front of your face when you did that. However, you can cause a dead spot in water if you swim in the same area, breathing the same water, using up the oxygen and expelling carbon dioxide, because the oxygen molecules, or I should say air molecules in general, because it's the same for carbon dioxide, in water move 3,000 times slower than they do in air. So this is actually one of the ways that different research that I did with sharks, when they get caught on long lines that are meant for like tuna, they just end up swimming in a circle because they're stuck on this hook and they can't go anywhere. And these long lines stay out for like sometimes weeks at a time. They're just swimming in a circle for a long time and they create a dead spot and they suffocate because they've used up the air too quickly, and like too quickly for it to like reintegrate into that area. So I forgot the question, but
Yeah, in the summer months, if you go offshore, like all over the reef in Biscayne, it's pretty common to see them like floating on top of each other.
yeah. Yeah, no, and it just has to do with the fact, and again, I don't actually know that sea turtles can breathe through their rear end underwater. I know that freshwater turtles can do that. They might be able to, but otherwise they just regulate their oxygen very well underwater, which is why they can kind of sleep underwater. But during like any kind of activity like that, they're going to need more oxygen. So staying at the surface is probably more convenient for them. Yes.
Going back to your point about there's more females than males because of the change temperature, climate change. I would have thought sex is determined before the eggs are hatched, right?
It's
That's what
not.
they make.
It's not. It's determined by temperature. It's the same with alligators and a few other reptiles. The sex is determined as depending on the temperature of the nest.
Really?
So as they're developing, the sex can change one way or the other.
I know in Broward they used to do like sea turtle treks where you could go out at like 1 in the morning and watch them hatch. Is there anything like that here?
The Miami-Dade Sea Turtle Conservation Project, they do hatchling releases. You'll have to go online and find it. But what happens in that case is if they end up with hatchlings that are found in a nest when they're evaluating it that are still alive, after a certain time in the morning, they won't release them because it's too hot or it's too dangerous. So they end up keeping them, and then when night comes, they'll do a hatchling release. And so I only do bill bags, which is a very, very small portion of all of, Miami-Dade County. They do, the rest of Key Biscayne, like Key Biscayne Beach and everything. They do Miami Beach, and then they do basically all the rest of the beaches in Miami-Dade County. So they can very often end up with a lot more hatchlings that they have kept until nightfall. So they will have scheduled hatchling releases. So you can go and watch. But
What's the name again?
it's the Miami-Dade Sea Turtle Conservation Program, I think, something like that. But it's part of the county program.
Encourage more males. Have they done any experiments where they could put the sand and just put more refrigeration or something around it?
No, I think that would end up being too expensive. There's
Give
too
them
many
a
nests.
Beach umbrella. Just rent them a beach umbrella.
Well, I mean, they have found that even just like a few degrees lower can be helpful. So sometimes even a nest that is put in the shade, as opposed to in the direct sun, may produce more males. But generally speaking, as much as possible, we don't want to touch the nests too much once they're laid. They do better. There have been experiments that show that nests that are relocated or messed around with too much, they have smaller hatchlings and like less robust hatchlings. And so, we prefer as much as possible not to touch them too much, or at all once the nest is made. We do occasionally, like we try not to, but we do occasionally have to move a nest around. Like if it's too close to the water, like, some female was either inexperienced or too lazy, came in like 4 feet from the water. And it's like, okay, well, the next high tide, that's going to, be washed out. So sometimes we will intervene and move a nest. But generally speaking, we try not to because it tends to be better for the hatchlings' survival. Yes.
How many nests do you have in the park right now?
10? Okay, I didn't remember.
When's the peak?
Peak is usually, I think, mid-June to the end of June. So it depends on when our first nest is. So, if you start getting them, we usually start getting them sometime in April. And so 8 weeks, they'll start depending on early or late April, they'll start hatching around sometime in June. And like I said, the temperature matters. So if it's warmer outside, they'll hatch a little earlier. And if it's cooler, they'll hatch a little bit later. What we have been finding is that they've been hatching like earlier than what is generally normal because it's warmer outside. So that's something that we're keeping track of. But it's hard to say because now, you know, things are becoming a little more unpredictable with the weird weather that we keep having. But yeah, generally we look at like 8 to 9 weeks. Anybody else? Can't see past the light. All right, thank you guys very much.